Good morning. So I wanted to talk a little bit about stories or preparing stories for your campaign. We've talked a little bit on Discord today, and it struck me. Obviously, again, in text, it's hard to communicate live in text, responding to everybody's input, and very easily can be very easy to be misunderstood, etc. But I want to talk a little bit about this. So those who have researched or studied or taken writing classes or endeavored to understand film or theater or just culture. Shakespeare is credited with basically writing every story, and everything that comes is a regurgitation uh, of Shakespeare's original 6, 7 stories, right? And Kurt Vonnegut defines these very well. 7 stories. Kurt Vonnegut is a writer and a phenomenal writer. But again, so there are these 7 basic stories that occur in literature, film, theater, etc. The only thing that changes are the details, not what these stories are. So there's rags to riches, right? This is the very common one. This is. I'll get to why I'm discussing this in relationship to gaming. Okay, so this is really why I say don't write stories for your sessions. Don't create campaign stories, um, because it's you're writing something that makes the characters irrelevant. Their decisions are irrelevant. The consequences of the game are relevant because you have decided a goal. You have decided a path in which the players are going to go on, right? That's not gaming. That's interactive storytelling. But I'll talk about how these stories happen, right? These stories happen because as a result of play, not because we're writing a D&D campaign where the characters are going to go, man in a hole, right? So if you were just to say to me, what is Dungeons and Dragons in a nutshell, traditional D&D? It is rags to riches. We start as a 1-level character, and we are going to go to riches or die, right? We're going to do this thing, right? That's the game arc in Dungeons and Dragons. You start at level 1, and you go from rags 0, and you level up and get rich and get strong and conquer monsters, etc. And you become rich, basically. That's the simple story arc. That's the simple arc of the D&D system, the D&D game. That has nothing to do with story. That just happens to be the arc of every character at the table. That's their arc. They're going from rags to riches. The characters who die, well, they die. Their story ends, right? Their character in the story. That's just the result of their character, right? So one of the reasons why I say don't, you know, understand you can prepare a world and you can have variables that are impacting the world, which will inevitably impact the players, the characters. So yes, you can have a campaign world, and yes, you can have an evil emperor who is trying to take over your country, and he is working to do that through many different means. And because he's doing that, he's impacting the world, and the effects upon that are going to affect the characters. And it shouldn't impact the characters enough through play that they want to do something about it, right? They would be motivated to, deal with this guy because it's making their lives harder or more dangerous, or it's something they just can't tolerate, like slavery. They're enslaving people, and you want the characters to hopefully decide this is not a world they want to partake in. They want to do something about it. So yes, you can have an evil emperor or king or whatever, right? I think this is good campaigning. We have a thing happening in the world. What the players choose to do with that, hopefully, is motivated by their characters, and it's motivated by how the world affects the characters. And then hopefully the characters start to affect the world, and we start to see how the world changes one way or the other. Okay. So I've said it before, you don't have to worry about a story for your games. Stories happen. They happen because the characters interact with the variables. This leaves stories. So the 7 stories, rags to riches. And again, this is covering every story ever told, right? All that changes is the details, right? All that changes whether this is okay. So rags to riches, riches to rags. You're rich and you fall, right? Man in a hole. This is fall, then rise, right? So this is I'm trying to think of examples here. Uh, uh, So rags to riches is easy, right? Everybody's seen this. The guy who starts out homeless. I'm trying to think of the Sullivan. I think it's the old black and white film. Uh, Sullivan's Travels. He starts out um, uh, homeless, and he rises to a rich man. Right in during the Depression, and then riches to rags. Right, start as a rich man, and you lose everything, and you fall. Right. Man in a hole is fall, then rise. So we start out. Ben-Hur is a fine example of, we already see Ben-Hur is what he is, and he is stripped of everything. He has to start, from the bottom and rise. Gladiator is in a way this, right. Icarus, rise then fall, right. This is flying too close to the sun, get your wings burned and you fall. So this is the perfect example of hubris, right. You think you're so beyond it, and then ultimately you get your wings clipped, so to speak. Cinderella, rise, fall, rise, right. This is all the Tom Cruise films in the early 80s, right. Every movie Tom Cruise made, I think from the beginning of his career, before he became a producer and started producing, almost all of those were rise, fall, rise, and they were all tied to the turning point in those films for Tom Cruise was a girl. The girl would give him the faith to get back on his feet and go do his thing. So it always took the feminine woman to get him back on his feet. So think Top Gun, right? His biggest film. He rises as the top pilot, his buddy dies, and then he collapses, and it takes the girl pushing him, and he rises again, right? This is Days of Thunder. This is Cocktail. This was Tom Cruise's entire career. Every film is the same, right? Rise, fall, rise. And then, of course, fall, rise, fall, right, is Oedipus. Okay. So these are the 7 stories that are generally told over and over and over again. We just change the character names, we change the genre, we change them, right? But whether you're a writer or a screenwriter, if you understand that, then it helps you compose interesting narratives that are universally that are universe for the human existence, which is why these are popular, is why they're told over and over and over, because we are, as human beings, attempting to resolve these things constantly, right? These eternal conflicts in humanity. Okay. So that's why I tell, have a world, have a setting, understand the key players, understand their motivations. If you are running a world like Dark Age of Man, right? We have kingdoms, we have particular NPCs, and then we have this tiny little village, Dredgewater, where the players will start their career, and we don't know their stories. We don't know the story of all of them together, and we don't know their individual story. They're generally going to start at Repute 3, which means they have some wiggle room to be a peasant with some skills, or body, a warrior, for instance, or whatever. But we just don't know these characters and where they're going to go. And because we have multiple players in most game sessions, there is no single protagonist. There is no hero of this adventure. There is a group of players that are hopefully all, somehow involved as characters, and are somewhat of singular mind as to what they're trying to accomplish. Hopefully, what they're trying to accomplish is related contextually to what's happening in the game world. So if I introduce a world where there's famine, and there is an evil emperor who's enslaving everybody to do these things, they're going to be they're going to be dropped on their head in this situation where they may be starving and they may actually be slaves. They decide as characters what their story is going to be, and we're not going to stay slaves. We're going to escape, or we're going to rise up against the emperor, whatever the case may be. So the difference between, obviously, having a story and an intent on the final outcome or goal, in my opinion, for gaming, is counter to why we role play. It's counter to why we game. It's counter to why we ask all these people to come to the table and enjoy partaking in a social event with random elements like dice, cards, etc. So the story is what occurs. The story is what we reflect back on and go, wow, Taro had a rise, and Taro had a fall, and Taro's trying to have a rise again in Symbaroum. That's his character arc, right? Taro's character arc has been kind of a rise, fall, rise. right? To some degree, but on a very personal character level, right? Our actual Symbaroum campaigns aren't a grand story, right? We're just a group of mercenaries slash treasure hunters that encounter these variables in the world that we attempt to engage, right, as characters. And as GMs, we try to provide a space where there's conflict, there's dilemmas, so the characters will engage in that, right? David, 2 sessions ago, brilliant dilemma. Malleus lay not comatose, but unresponsive and dying from this fungus, this disease. Now, we as characters could say, well, tough shit, Malleus, well, we'll see what we can do. Or we, because we're characters who care about Malleus, he's part of our group, we have the motivation to go out there in this world and get this particular cure and get it back to Malleus, right? That becomes the impetus of why we would get up in the morning, put on our armor and don our shields and our swords, and right. But what story is that going to look like? Who knows until the dice start flying and the characters start making decisions, right? And that is the joy of gaming, right? We don't have to prepare a story. A story is what happens. A story is literally what occurs from characters making decisions and taking actions against the world setting and its variables. That's it. That's all you got to do, right? So as a GM, set the table and see where the characters, what dominoes start to fall and how that changes the narrative, the direction, right? And so we can have those minor character arcs, again, fall, rise, rise, fall, rise, rise, and then ultimately completely fall. Again, Icarus is an example. But as far as system, D&D, for instance, is quite literally a rags to riches system. You start at level 1 and you are going to rise, right? There will be no fall unless you ultimately die. Now, you could have a moment where you lose your kingdom, your cast, if you're playing high level and you've rised to high level, you built a stronghold, you have an army, and then suddenly another army, wipes you out and desecrates your army, takes your stronghold, and you survive, and you ultimately are level 20, but you are without your stronghold, you are without your riches, and you gotta, you have fallen. If you continue the campaign, you might try to amass another army and go back and take your stronghold again. Then it could be a rise, fall, rise scenario. But we don't prepare that what you're going to do. Joe, you're going to do this, and in 25 sessions, you're going to experience rise, fall, rise. That's the mistake that I think GMs try to do. They try to create what they're going to experience. I want you to experience rise, fall, rise. And they prepare that campaign. I think that's you don't have to. It's too complicated. Allow it to happen naturally. Create legitimate NPCs with legitimate motivations in a legitimate world setting, a world setting where the variables matter. The variables should be impacting the world, so it impacts the characters, and the characters have to make tough decisions. The characters have to decide, if I go right, that means left, the village burns, but at least we went right and we dealt with the bridge. Unfortunately, it cost us the village, right? They can make decisions. Let's go save the village, but then they lose the bridge to the enemy army. These are wonderful dilemmas. These are conflicts. There is no right or wrong answer, but they create a myriad of interesting future problems, right? Okay. Now we don't have a blacksmith because the village has been burned. We saved the bridge for the king, but unfortunately now we don't have a blacksmith. We don't have a tavern. There's so much now that's been decimated and destroyed that affects their ability to purchase goods or to rest peacefully or whatever, right? Depending on the machine you're using, the game system you're using. So this is why I really argue, I don't know how many GMs do write stories. I think they want you to experience a particular thing. I really want them tonight to meet my dragon. I've got this really cool dragon and I want to talk to him like a dragon, and so they're going to force them to meet the dragon. That's because they think that's going to be cool and interesting, etc. And this is where GMs ultimately railroad, right? Players' decisions don't matter. Their options are there, but they're faux options. It's a shell game of choices, but they're really going to experience what you want them to experience. So I think you're best left to create the petri dish, so to speak, and let their play evolve into the thing it's going to evolve into. And by the way, you will have stories. You will actually experience a story as opposed to tell a story, as opposed to prepare a story. Experience the game, experience the story. So for us, very much we like to reflect back. I mean, even in some of our games live, and there's some of these happen on the channel with Ivan, we'll be in the middle of the game and we almost have to stop and say, well, let's reflect back on what just happened. This is the story, right? Because we're playing to find out. You almost can't believe how things stop or how things are unfolding. So you almost pause in game and say, dude, let's reflect back on what the hell's going on here. And you begin to recognize the contextual, the grander image of what that means, right? Or you can just plot along, and many of those things can be missed or subconsciously taken in, and they're not consciously recognized, right? We might understand subconsciously there's been this arc in the session, or this arc in a character's story, but what ultimately happens is we don't reflect back on it. So we might get it subconsciously. We might know we've experienced something. We just haven't thought about it consciously, like self-awareness, right? Are we self-reflective? Are we even analyzing our lives, our experiences? Are we attempting to get better? Are we attempting to pay attention to the world around us? And I think this is true in gaming. We can just plow ahead on the monster. Overcoming the monster is one of the stories, right? We overcome the monster, right? And D&D is the rise, but it is the rise overcoming the monster, the obstacle, which is that story, right? The overcoming monster is 90% of game engines. 90% of the gaming is designed for that. D&D is quite literally designed to be rags to riches, overcoming monster, overcoming monster, overcoming monster, which is one of the top stories, right, from literature. It is it's probably the most popular in all, right, in all of cinema, as far as easy linear storytelling, right? Okay. Conan, right? You can argue in a very subtle way. If let's just say we're looking at the movie Conan, right? I'm not going to get into the literature. There's the chronicles, so the actual Conan stuff are chronicles, so they're not necessarily in linear order. But let's take the film. He's a boy, and he loses everything at the beginning. His father killed, his mother raped, and killed. He's the only one left. He's taken as a slave. So we could see Conan in that particular film starting at the bottom, right? Rags to riches. Or we could see this, if you wanted to see that the boy was technically at the top, he fell, rises, right? You could see it that way, but really it is a rags to riches, right? He goes from a boy slave to Conan the Barbarian, right? Conan the King, Conan the Conqueror, Conan the Destroyer, whatever term you want to use. But ultimately, that's the Conan arc in a nutshell. Even if we look at the chronicles, the short stories, the stories of Conan, it's ultimately about him, right, ascending in some way, right? So it's very, very common theme. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons itself, the actual game system, starts you at 0 level or 1 level, and we do this linear rags to riches, overcoming monster, overcoming obstacle, overcoming monster, whatever it is, right? Okay. So that's why I say don't sweat story. It actually comes from play. It actually comes from characters interacting with threats, which is why I say no characters and understand conflict as a GM, understand how to create dilemmas. Let the players be their characters. Put in front of those characters, if they're playing authentically and they actually care about their character, you can create conflicts and dilemmas that should be relevant to the player through their characters' motivations, etc. Now we have interesting reasons why the characters are compelled to act, compelled to do things or not do things, and there could be ramifications on a greater world stage, right? So experience the game, and you will experience a story, right? Okay. So anyway, I just want to talk about that. Thanks. Bye.